after 2 years of working behind the scenes, I quit my corporate sales job and went full time into the world of entrepreneurship to start my company at the new Primal. Um, and very quickly, I realized I was going to need a lot more capital than I had in order to sustain building the company. And so, fortunately, I'd built a really nice network within my community and just started asking around and asking for introductions to people who might be able to help or people who knew people who might be able to help in raising some capital for the business. And I met with several investors and venture capitalists and local business people. And, the common theme that I kept running into was that I was either too early or I was asking for too little. And in fact, one guy said directly to me, he said, if you doubled your ask, I think you'd have better results. And that like scared me to death because, everything like came up for me in that moment. One, like I had this unproven little startup. I couldn't possibly double how much I'm looking for. And then, everything from my childhood, I couldn't help but like kind of draw from that. Like, I'd grown up in Section 8 housing and neither of my parents finished school. My mom managed to get me into a school in a different part of the district. Fortunately, that was one of the better schools in the district. And I was on a special assignment. And so the people that I grew up around at school versus the ones in my neighborhood were lived very different kinds of lives. And at school they had, everyone had nice houses and nice cars and seemingly stable at-home family lives. And, the kids all excelled at school and sports. And, I felt a little bit like a fish out of water, but, seeing the level of success or at least apparent success that my friends' parents had, it inspired me. And I always knew I wanted to, I guess chase the things that they had, but it always felt like I was starting from a deficit. Like I was just lagging behind and everyone else seemed to have this like head start. And I had to fight against this notion that, my career or my destiny was somehow predetermined. But, as I heard the investor echo in my mind, double your ask and you'll see a lot more interest. I realized the reason why that like gave me so much anxiety was that I still saw myself as that kid, the one who grew up in the Section 8 housing and who felt like he didn't belong. It sort of, brought all those emotions back up. And, I was letting fear kind of guide my decisions and it kept me in this like state of playing small. But, in that moment, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to double my ask. And so when I started talking to other people within my network and explaining what I was up to and then explaining how much capital I was looking to raise, suddenly there really was a lot more interest. And so I got invited to meet with this group of entrepreneurs who had started a small fund, and they invited me to their office to give my pitch, essentially. And so, of course, I was anxious about that and showed up. But, the minute I stepped through the door, there was this sense of calm that kind of overcame me. And I don't know, it was almost like I felt like I was supposed to be there. So, I met this group and of course we hit it off. We hit it off like immediately. And I felt like they got me. I felt like we all had great synergy and like the meeting seemed to go really well. They asked great questions. I left the meeting feeling energized and pretty optimistic. And then all of that came crashing down the next day when I got the rejection email saying it was, it's great to meet you, love what you're up to, but it's not for us. We're going to pass. And, I wrestled with all those feelings of inferiority again and struggled for a minute. and licked my wounds, took some deep breaths, and I decided I was going to sleep on it and kind of collected myself for the next 24 hours. And then I decided I was going to send kind of a Hail Mary style email, but one that read something to the extent of, really appreciate the opportunity. I felt like we had great synergy. It sounds like there are some objections that you have that maybe I wasn't able to speak to. And I don't think either of us is going to feel really great about walking away from this without at least me having the opportunity to address those objections, something like that. And I asked for an hour to jump on the phone and just answer whatever outstanding questions or big objections they might have. And they gave me that phone call. And then after that phone call, they decided they were in. They changed their mind. And, in fact, they said the reason they changed their mind was my response. It wasn't even the meeting. It was my response to the rejection. And I don't say that to brag or anything like that, but I've learned since then and after raising multiple rounds of capital that, it's basically the same calorie burn to raise $5,000 as it is to raise $500,000, as quite candidly as it is to raise $5 million. I mean, it's kind of the same energy. But it takes courage and it takes confidence and it takes real conviction in what you're doing. And yeah, it's scary to ask for something bigger than you think you deserve. And you have to quiet the voices in your head long enough to overcome them. And the only way I've found to do that is, one is through experience. Like you have to have some experience in what you're doing. You kind of have to know what you're doing. You have to have, the confidence comes from practice and doing it and knowing what the hell you're doing. And then you gotta quiet those voices. And so the way to do that is you got to replace the sound bites. You got to turn the volume up on the things that would encourage you and reinforce your worth. And you got to turn the volume down on the things that fuel self-doubt. And then, the only other thing I can say for certain is that it takes time and it takes work. I mean, execution is actually really hard. And I would argue, I think it was Steve Jobs, who's at least loosely credited with the quote that, ideas are plentiful or easy, but execution is really hard. And I've found that to be true in my life. But nonetheless, I still battle, some of that self-doubt. I've been in the trenches for more than a decade building a national consumer products brand, and that stuff still comes up. But with a lot of practice, you do get a lot better at silencing the voices and reminding yourself that you do belong here. And so I said all that to say, in the middle of this entire process of building a national brand, I also became a parent twice. My daughter Quincy was born in 2014, followed by my second daughter Ellis, who was born in 2016. And let me tell you, they turned my world completely upside down in the best way. What I could do before they were born, I couldn't do after they were born. The weekend work stints, the all-nighters, the 80-hour work weeks, those seem to all kind of fly out the door, with a couple of babies running around. And, I kept thinking to myself, as soon as they reach whatever the next milestone is, as soon as they can walk, or as soon as they go here, whatever, I'll be able to go back to that. It'll get easier. And if you're a parent or you've been a parent for any length of time, you realize that is a trap in your thinking. It does not get easier. In fact, I think they might require more of my time today than they did when they were really little. But the question is, where's the line? Like, how do you balance all that? How do you balance, going after your dream, building something, that your family is proud of, building a legacy, and then also like not losing yourself in the process? and, building a family, building a life worth living. And so my goal is to answer that on this podcast. We're going to dive into this beautiful, messy journey of entrepreneurship and parenthood. And we're going to go after the real stuff. No filters. Personally, I'll unveil how I've raised over $20 million on multiple rounds of capital, built a nationwide consumer brand, how I built an 8-figure Amazon business, how we disrupted and bulldozed through the meat snacks aisle in the grocery stores and offering the country's first grass-fed beef jerky, and disrupting a category that really had been dominated by 2 major players for many, many, many years. Really with no experience, defying expectations and becoming an industry leader, all while being a full-time parent. And, I'm also fortunate enough to know and to have gotten to know a wide array of amazing entrepreneurs who have also been in the trenches, who have also built amazing businesses and lifestyles, and, people that haven't really been given the handouts, and so just, gotten their hands dirty, rolled up their sleeves, and they're going to come on and give you their play-by-play on how they did and how they're doing what they're doing. And, I would be honored and I would be humbled if you would join us on this journey. And so I ask you to stay tuned, and I welcome you to the Hunt, Gather, Nurture podcast. I'm your host, Jason Burke.